Good morning. Good morning. Guys, I am so glad that you are here today. Each and every one of you in this room, and my prayer and my hope for us this morning is that as we worship together and as we learn together, that we would encounter Jesus, and that through that we would be equipped to know him more and to become more like him than when we entered the doors this morning. My name is Michaela, and I see a lot of new to me faces here this morning, which I love. My husband Timothy and I pastor the Deepwater BLT community in Timberley. But Nathan and I are doing a little bit of a pulpit swap this morning. So he's out there in BLT. He only has to preach one time. And I'm here with you guys this morning, and I have the marvelous opportunity to preach to both services. I'm very glad to be here. And as I said, we're continuing this series that we have been in. This is week 4 of Suit Up, which is a series that we've been walking through on the armor of God. So Pastor Nathan and I have been preaching the same topic every week of this series. So I've been down in BLT. He's been here downtown. And I don't know about you guys, but we have really been enjoying this series out in BLT. Have you guys been enjoying it? Yes? Okay. So before I start, I just want to give you a little bit of a sidebar. My pastor growing up would have called this a commercial break. But I just want to say, so in BLT, I wouldn't necessarily say that we're rowdy, but we are definitely a talkative bunch. Okay, so there are going to be a few times throughout this morning where I want to hear your feedback and I want to hear what you guys have to say. And if you're an introverted person and that scares the heck out of you, that's totally okay. You can just sit and experience. But I value your feedback. I value what you have to say. So there's going to be some times where I ask you some questions and I'm looking for you to respond, okay? Okay, are you up to that challenge? Yes. All right. Okay, let's practice it a little bit right now. So, as I said, we've been really, really enjoying this series out in BLT, but Nathan has been preaching it here, and I've been able to read his sermons, but I haven't been in the room while he's been preaching them. So what I would love to know is if there are a few people who are here, would you mind telling the room some things that you have stuck out for you during this series? Like, what are some things that you have learned, some things that have really walked with you out the door into real life? I'll give you a cheat code. Ewab's going to put up these are the 3 pieces of armor that we've already done. So what do you think? What are some things that have stuck with you throughout this series? Be strong and courageous. Love it. Walking in peace. Love that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Peace is not the absence of war, the absence of stress, the absence of anxiety, but it is the presence of Jesus in our life as we encounter those things. Anybody else? So what righteousness versus lived righteousness? Imputed righteousness versus lived righteousness. I love that. Guys, those are such good things. That's exceptional. I hope the second service has as good as answers as these are. That was phenomenal. So today what I want to do is I want to begin our service by reading that anchor passage that we've been working through in Ephesians 6, just to get ourselves reoriented. And today what I want you to do is to pay special attention to verse 16, which I think is highlighted in yellow here on the screen. So Ephesians 6:13 to 17. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in your place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all of this, take up your shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all of the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Amen. Hallelujah. I think that one of the best postures, the best approaches that we can come to Scripture with is a posture of curiosity. So this posture of being willing to ask questions and dig below the surface. So no matter whether you have just started reading the Bible, whether you've never cracked it open before, or whether you have been reading the Bible every day since before you can remember, there is still so much, I guarantee, to learn, more to receive, and more of God to explore and uncover. So today that's what I want to do. I want to approach this passage with a spirit of curiosity. Now, this passage in particular, in Ephesians 6, it is so full of imagery, and we've been talking about that every week. Paul is using this image of a Roman soldier in particular to talk about spiritual battles that we are fighting. And one of the most important questions that I think that we can be asking, and the place that Nathan and I start every week, is with this question: what is the significance of? What is the significance of? So why is Paul using this piece of armor to teach us about this element of discipleship to Jesus? And when we ask this question, it can really help us to dig deeper, to get below the surface, and to explore the rich imagery of this passage, to explore this deep call to discipleship that we find here. So as we start this week, what I want to do, I'm going to read verse 16 again. And what I want you to do is to keep this question in mind. What is the significance of? And I want you to see if there are any details that stick out to you or imagery in this verse that you think could be significant for us this morning, okay? So verse 16 says, "In addition to all of this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all of the flaming arrows of the evil one." Take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all of the arrows of the evil one. So what do you think? What are some things that you're curious about in this verse this morning? Faith. Yeah, so why is the shield attributed to faith? That's a great one. Anybody else? There's one more that sticks out to me. Yeah, why are they flaming arrows? That feels like oddly specific. That's a very specific adjective for Paul to just throw in there. He could have said, with which you can extinguish, no, he could have said, with which you can, I don't know, like bat down all of the arrows of the evil one, but he didn't say that. He says, we're going to extinguish flaming arrows. That's a little bit weird. So that's where I want to start this morning. That's the place where I want to jump in. And I wonder if you're ready for a little history in order for us to do that. Are you ready for some history this morning? Okay, history. So not only was the Roman army, we've already talked about this, the Roman army was one of the biggest armies in the world, the biggest armies that the world had ever seen at this point, but also they were one of the most terrifying armies that the world had ever seen. They didn't just fight with weapons. And their strength wasn't just in numbers, although they did have that too. The Roman army ruled the game of psychological warfare. So they were getting in the heads of their enemy. So they developed and they adapted tactics for war that were specifically to intimidate their enemies and to cause chaos and distraction. And one of the things that they would do is they would set arrows on fire and they would launch them all at the enemy. But these arrows, they weren't necessarily meant to kill or to injure right away. What they did is they would shoot these arrows into their enemy ranks in hopes that that arrow would hit the ground, that the ground would catch on fire, and that it would break up the ranks of the enemy to cause confusion so that they would be able to break through. And actually, if there was a siege that was going on, so if this battle was happening near a town or a city, they would completely bypass the army that they were fighting, and they would shoot these arrows over top of them and into the city, hoping that this city that this army was trying to defend would catch on fire. The homes and the businesses and the place of gathering and commerce, they were hoping that if those things caught on fire, that the army who was defending it, that they would be confused, that they would be distracted, that they would be angered, that they would be anguished, that they would grieve their city, and it would cause them to win the battle. So these fiery arrows that were used by the Roman army, they were used to cause chaos and destruction, to break the courage of their enemy. Now, in our lives, and in the spiritual battles that we find ourselves in, I think that there are different attacks that the enemy uses against us. And so far in this series, we've been talking about how the enemy might use doubt and deception against us, how he might use temptation and pride, or disagreements and differences between us. But those are not the kind of attacks that we're talking about this morning. This morning, we're talking about a very specific kind of attack. The kind of attack that could set your whole life ablaze and shake your faith to its very core. You know, there is a surprisingly long list of things in this world that have the potential to shake the foundations of our lives. We face things like illness and disease, disasters, storms, hate, hurt, abuse, destruction, war, death. I think if we were to take a poll of the people in this room, every one of us would have a story of how we had encountered one of those things before in our lives. But the reality is that none of those things were involved in the way that God created this world to be. But he does tell us that while this spiritual war is still going on around us, we can have faith in the fact that he will be with us through every trial that we face. In Joshua 1:9, it says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." And in John 16:33, Jesus says to his disciples, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, for I have overcome the world." Jesus tells us to take heart. But I think that the enemy knows that that is often easier said than done. The enemy knows that when we stand in the middle of particularly terrible circumstances, that we are susceptible to doubting God's goodness and his love for us. And we can be tempted into giving up our faith in God and in his promises. And that is where the fiery arrows rain down. The fiery arrows that we're talking about this morning, they aren't necessarily the circumstances that we find ourselves in, although those can be very, very difficult. The fiery arrows that we're talking about this morning are the thoughts of deception and doubt that the enemy places into our path in the middle of trying circumstances. They could be thoughts like, how could I believe in God when I prayed to him to heal my loved one and they died anyway? How can I trust a God who allows violence and hate and injustice to continue? Why would I want a relationship with a God whose church has hurt me and people that I know? How can I trust God when my situation doesn't change? How can I believe in him when I can't see him moving? How can I have faith when I can't see God at all? What proof is there that he even exists? These are very real thoughts that we grapple with, and they are thoughts that are born out of fear and out of fear of the unknown. They can set a fire and they can consume us. They can break us down and destroy our relationship with God. Just like the fiery arrows that the Roman army sent into their enemies' midst, the intention here is not necessarily to kill or to hurt immediately. Their intention is not immediate wounding. Their purpose is to cause chaos and to break down our confidence, to create long-lasting destruction in our lives. They hit close to home, and their point is to destroy the lives with God that we have worked so hard to cultivate. But in the middle of all of that, Paul says to us, hold up your shield of faith. And this is where we get to that second question that we were talking about. Yoav, can you put that next slide up? We're going to talk about what is the significance of faith being assigned to the shield. Now, the closest thing that we come to in the Bible for an exact definition of faith is in Hebrews 11:1. This is what it says. Faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance in what we do not see. From this, we can gather that this whole idea of faith is wrapped up in the idea of confidence and trust. And as followers of Jesus, we are trusting the truth that Jesus has given to us. And this is just another great example of how that belt of truth comes in clutch, right? As followers of Jesus, we are having faith in the truth that comes to us through God's word that God has given to us. But the reality is that we don't necessarily have the advantage of trusting in something that's apparent, that being able to see this thing right in front of us. We follow the teachings of a man who lived 2,000 years ago. Jesus even acknowledged this to his disciples in John 20 when he says, "You believe because you have seen me, but blessed are those who will believe without seeing me." That's our task. We trust in the promises and the truth that are written to us in this book, which originate even before the time of Jesus. But our faith, our confidence, our hope for a better future is not only based on Jesus' words that he gives to us, but also in the experience of generations, hundreds of generations of his followers who have gone before us and who have encountered him in their lives, including the community that we have around us today. See, faith is confidence that Jesus is who he says he is. It's assurance that he is Lord, that his teachings are true, and that he loves his creation deeply. Faith is hope that the world can be changed through following him and loving like him. Faith is confidence that Jesus is who he says that he is, and when life is good, believing this is easy. But when life gets difficult, that's when our faith becomes tested, and ironically, that's when we need our faith the most. I think that one great example of Jesus demonstrating that he's worthy of our faith comes to us in Mark chapter 4, and it says this: Jesus calms the storm. It says, as the evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." And so they took Jesus out on the boat and they started out, leaving the crowds behind, although there were other boats that followed them. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. But Jesus was sleeping in the back of the boat with his head on the cushion in the middle of the storm. So the disciples run over, they wake him up, and they shout, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" When Jesus woke up, he stood and he rebuked the wind and the waves, and he said, "Silence, be still." And suddenly the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. He asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples were absolutely terrified. "Who is this man?" they asked each other. "Even the winds and the waves obey him." Now, the Greek word that's used in this text, in the original language, to describe the storm that they find themselves in is a word called lilaps. It's very fun to say. Why don't you turn to the person next to you and say lilaps? A lilaps. Lilaps. So a lilaps is a very specific type of storm, and one that we might even be familiar with here in Halifax. A lilaps is the kind of storm that comes on very fiercely, that has very little warning, but it also is a very fierce gale. It's a whirlwind. It's a hurricane. It's a storm that comes out of nowhere, but is very, very fierce. And I think that the sensation of being in a lilaps is very similar to the kind of crises that we've been talking about today. When we're in the middle of a lilaps, it's easy to believe that the storm is the most powerful part of our story. It's easy to believe that the lilaps is more likely to drown us than Jesus is to save us. And in that moment, the enemy convinces us to put our faith in the storm and its power above Jesus and his power and his love for us. But what we read about in this passage is that the storm is under Jesus' control. It's under his command. And I think a very interesting part of this passage for me has always been that as afraid as the disciples were of the storm, they were terrified of Jesus' power. The disciples were more afraid after Jesus calmed the storm than they had been when the storm was drowning their boat and while their boat was pitching side to side. You see, we serve a Jesus who is bigger than the lilaps. We put our faith in a Jesus who can overcome and manage the storms of our life. Who is he that even the lilaps listens to him? C.S. Lewis, I think, speaks to this point really, really well in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe when he famously said, "He's not safe, but he is good." And faith in that Jesus, belief that he is on our side, is enough to extinguish even the best place, fiery arrows and lies and doubt that the enemy could send our way. We follow a Jesus who commands the lilaps. And I want to end today by connecting this idea of faith in Jesus, a Jesus who is worthy of our faith, and answering that question that we talked about at the beginning. What is the significance of faith being assigned to the shield? This is where it gets really, really practical for us. This is where the rubber meets the road for us this morning. See, the shield of a Roman soldier, it was called a scutum, which is also a fun word, scutum. They were these massive shields. From historical texts, we know that they were 5 feet tall and 2.5 feet wide. So that's like me tall and then 2 of me wide. They were huge. And these shields were made out of a layer of wood, and then they had several layers of animal hide or leather over top of them. And each morning, the soldiers would have to oil their shields before they went out. Not only because they didn't want the leather to crack and become dry, but also because if they didn't oil their shield, the integrity of their shield would be compromised. And if they encountered any enemies with fiery arrows, dry leather would catch on fire and it would burn faster. So the amount of time and dedication that was required of a soldier each and every day so that they could ensure that they would be protected and that their shield would hold up in battle. And our faith is the exact same way. We need to work it. We need to engage it. We need to tend to it every day. Our faith in God is built by exercising and engaging in our relationship with God. And like every other relationship, it can't grow without spending time with the other person, right? If I had somebody who was just like a casual acquaintance that I didn't know very well, and I might trust them to go and get me some coffee. I might trust them to know my coffee order because the consequences aren't very big. I might just end up with a vanilla latte instead of the caramel latte that I wanted. But that person who I don't know very well, I wouldn't trust them to go and pick up my kids. I wouldn't trust them to come through for me if I was in the middle of an emergency, right? And that doesn't have to necessarily be because they're an untrustworthy person. It's just because I haven't found them to be trustworthy yet. I don't know them. And so if we don't know Jesus and we haven't invested in our relationship with him, if we haven't tested our trust in him in the small things, then how are we supposed to know that he's going to come through for us in the big things? For the record, he is more than capable of doing that, but that's on us for not investing in our relationship with him, right? See, Jesus is good. He is kind. He is powerful. He is loving. He is more than capable of shouldering and withstanding our burdens and our doubts. Do you know that it's actually possible to have questions, to be curious about the mysteries and the intricacies of God, and also have a strong faith? God isn't scared of our questions. But it is much easier to endure hard things when we have faith in him. It's not easy, but there is a burden that is lifted from our shoulders. There is a strength that comes and a fortitude that comes with knowing that God is on our side and that he is working for our good. So, in order to be protected when the enemy comes from his fiery arrows of deception and doubt and temptation, we need to find a rhythm of engaging with God. So whether that looks like 15 minutes in the morning, or maybe you do devotions with your family every night, or maybe you spend some time every Saturday that's set aside for you and God. We can learn from the intentionality of the soldiers, because I will tell you right now that without an intentional rhythm of meeting with God, being close to him, our faith will dry up and it will wither and it won't stand up against the fiery arrows of the devil. I'll leave you just with one final encouragement this morning. We've already talked about how big the Roman shields were, right? They were 5 feet by 2.5 feet. And the purpose of that was so that when they were in battle, they would be able to put their shield on the ground and they could crouch behind it and they would be protected, right? Their whole body would be protected, which is really helpful, but their protection would become even stronger if there was a group of soldiers who were working together. So the Roman army would regularly practice this formation that's called the testudo formation, where all of the soldiers, so there would be traditionally 21 soldiers, and all of the soldiers on the front line would all come together and they would put their shields on the ground, but they would line them up close together so they created a wall. And then the soldiers who were in the second line would come in and they would put their shields on top of the first row of shields, kind of at an angle, so they would create a roof. And if they really, really needed to, the soldiers who were on the flanks could turn to the side and they could add another layer of protection. And so all of a sudden, instead of just one soldier hiding behind their own shield, they formed this testudo formation, which is also called the turtle formation. So they had protection on every side. And if they needed to, they could all move as one, they could all lift up their shields and still march forward together. And specifically, this formation was meant to protect against arrows and projectiles that were coming from on high. This is why it's important to build Christian community. Do you want to be the soldier that's standing by himself, crouching behind his shield, or do you want to be part of the testudo formation? See, we can't do relationship to Jesus alone. We weren't meant to. We need friendships and community, and not only for the accountability and encouragement that they give us, but also to fight our battles with us. So my question for you this morning is, who are your sisters and your brothers in arms? Who helps you? Who protects you from the enemy when it comes? Who gives you encouragement and intercedes on your behalf? Whose faith do you rely on when yours is lacking? If you find yourself in a place where you find that these questions make you feel alone or they make you feel uncomfortable, don't worry, because it's not too late. Being a part of a church community here on Sunday morning is a fantastic place to start. And then there are people who are amongst this community whose job it is to love and to help you and to support you while you find your own community. So Pastor Melissa, Pastor Colin, Pastor Nathan, who are down here every Sunday, they want to help you. They want to love you. They want to welcome you into this community. But building community also takes work. It takes you putting yourself out there. So maybe you could join a home church, or maybe you could join a serving team, or maybe you just even need to start smaller than that, and you need to just ask one person if they might be open to going to lunch with you after, or to find coffee together sometime during the week. But the key here is that good community doesn't just happen. It takes work, and sometimes it requires us to take the initiative. So if you feel overwhelmed by that, or if you're feeling at a loss of where to begin, Pastor Melissa, Pastor Colin, and I will all be available after the service, and we would love to encourage you and give you some resources and some next steps so that you can find yourself a testudo formation. See, community support, authentic friendships, or even accountability partners, whatever it is you want to call it, they are so important to our discipleship to Jesus. When we look at the life of Jesus, he was building circles around himself, circles of friends, circles of disciples, circles of followers. And when we look at the life of his disciples in the early church throughout the rest of the New Testament, we find the same thing. They went to each other for support. And I will tell you this, I have been through seasons in my life that have been really difficult, where I haven't felt like I had people in my corner, and it almost broke me. But on the other side of the spectrum, I have gone through even more difficult times where I have had a support system around me, and I came out on the other side stronger because of it. When you have people to lean on, it can make all of the difference to help you be able to persevere in faith. Life is difficult enough as it is, and you don't have to do it alone. So as we move forward today, as we continue our service and we take communion together, I want to give you two questions to think about as you come to the table and you commune with Jesus this morning, all right? You all put them up on the screen. So what are some rhythms that you can begin to engage in to help you form your shield of faith? So what are your weekly rhythms? What are your monthly rhythms? And then the second question is this: how does being in community help to protect us from the fiery arrows of the evil one? What are some specific ways that you can think about?